So welcome everyone. This is a sort of interactive drop-in session for those who are going to be using the essential model documentation to register their models and their grids. So I'll hand over to the model documentation sort of leadership. So that's David and Charlotte and Dan who have been driving this process, and they're going to do some demos, and there'll be time for questions and answers as well.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could I just add an idea to ask first? If I may? Could you raise your digital hand if you've already been using or tried to use the documentation process to create some EMD content? Just be really nice to know how many people are completely new to this who are in this meeting and those who've got some experience. Okay, so that's just Rachel by the look of it. Just checking. That's really good to know. It's absolutely not a problem. This was designed for both people with some experience and none, so it's just useful. That's great. So, sorry, yeah, Dan, do you want to then start with the process? Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Hi all. I'm Dan. I'm the one kind of getting this tool to work in the background. So if there are any kind of bugs or issues or kind of glitches, we're working on them. But if you report them to us, then we can add them to the long list of things to do. I'm going to start off by just talking through where to find information and how to get to the forms, kind of moving on to a bit and how to fill them in and what to expect when you do fill them in. And then ultimately, we'll then move on to kind of David and Charlotte to talk you through kind of the review process and what happens after and kind of how that all ties together. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that? Is that visible to other people? Okay, so we have a documentation page. There are 2 entry points to it. We will send the links later. We'll also send them by email to everyone who attends. Generally, these should be documented everywhere, and these contain a lot of information. Might not be the most organized fashion. So again, any feedback on that or anything that's missing would be quite useful for us to know, then we can add it in. But this is your general entry point that will tell you what there is, where it is, and how to use it. Any updates might come up in kind of boxes on the homepage or on the information for reviewers page. So the homepage kind of has a quick schematic, tells you a little bit about what the documentation is and kind of what should be in it. If you are a submitter, most of the information that you're going to be interested would be kind of in the information for submitters. We have a submission guide. So this is effectively one of the first things you should have a look at. Before that, however, it is quite useful to, if we go back to the homepage, it is quite useful to just have a browse of the EMD specification. This is in Zenodo. The link is right at the bottom of the left-hand kind of page, and we put a lot of work in kind of detailing what is in the EMD, how it should be kind of detailed. And this would just mean that you have an idea of when you submit something, if it matches the specification, it's less likely to be rejected. So you don't have to go kind of forwards and back between reviewers to figure out why and make corrections. So if it's right the first time around, it just means it goes through a little bit quicker. So just going back. So I mentioned on the left, information for submitters. Then you have your submission guide. This has got the same bits of information. It's got kind of the forms, the different stages. So we have 4 stages. The first stage is essentially just trying to define what your grid is, and then at the same time you can say what component families and model families you're using. If it's the first time you're registering these won't exist, but for most people after you, if they're using a component that comes from the same family, that entry likely will already exist, but it's always good to check it's there. Next, we have our computational grids. These are our simulation grids, and these reference kind of the grid cells that we use. Finally, we kind of take these simulation grids in the horizontal and vertical, pair them with components, And then we've got kind of effectively our domain specific segments of our model. And the final stage is the full model, which kind of ties in all the components and tells us actually this is what we're doing in its entirety. We also have a couple of links on here. So all submission forms are available. Alternatively, you can click on each individual form. So if I click on all submission forms, you have to log into GitHub, but you'll get a list of all the forms you can use. If you don't have a GitHub username, it's free to sign up, and you just click create an account here, and that will open it up, and then you'll get a list of free forms you can choose from. So David in a second might show you kind of what those look like, just because this browser is logged in. When we have our forms, we then filled in. I have a page that should tell you what to expect in submission. So in essence, we'll open up a form. It will look a little bit like, let's just make the screen a little bit bigger. It will look a little bit like this, where we have a set of drop downs. You can click them. You have a set of options. These get refreshed daily. So if you submit something, it might take about a day for it to propagate through, but anything that you submit will then appear in the next set of forms for you to pick down. And we have some text fields where you can enter numbers or some free text. When you click submit on your form, that creates an issue on GitHub. And that issue is just the formatted version of everything you've entered into the form. So here I've got 85 kind of vertical layers. I've got various numbers that I've added. And then we also have an additional collaborators section. That means that if you have worked with a few people, but only one person is submitting the form, those people also get kind of contribution, and that updates. So the commit that saves any changes you do or any submissions also gets their name credited to that submission. So it allows us to keep track of who's involved. If an error gets found later on, we know who to inform, but it also says these people have worked on, say, this entry for this model, and it allows kind of that to become a little bit more visible and a little bit better for everyone. Once you have that issue created, what then happens is we have a set of scripts. So GitHub Actions or workers are a set of effectively Python scripts that run on a small Linux machine. And then they take this information that's formatted and they do some checks. So we have 2 checks. So in ESGVoc, which is where kind of the information gets stored before it gets pushed to ESGF, we've written effectively a test suite. So we have classes that say, you want to submit this. Anything we can automate and say, is this correct? It can do that, and it tells us if the validation passes or it doesn't. And if it doesn't pass, you get a table as such that kind of says, oh, the region must be a type of region or a string, or it kind of tries to describe the error. And inside that, we might also have some useful tips and kind of collapsible drop downs, just tells you how to correct it. If you were to correct your issue, you would then go back to your issue at the very top of it. Can you see my mouse cursor?
Yep.
On the screen. Cool. Yep. Where it's moving on the top right hand corner, we have 3 dots, so the ellipsis. If you click that, you can click edit issue, and then I will send this link, but I also have a guide on kind of how to edit the issue. So this is also in the documentation, but we'll send it out again. You can edit your issue by kind of clicking that dot, selecting edit, changing the text that is in that issue, in that formatted kind of text submission. And what that will do is rerun those scripts, rerun those checks, and eventually you can kind of keep correcting it until it passes. Once it passes, we move on to the review stage. And the review stage itself shows the reviewers roughly what has been entered. So it shows you the files that will be made separately in the format that they will be. So you don't need to worry about this section too much, but I'm just explaining it so you know. If it appears, this is what it means. It means we have a number of files based on what the information you've given us that are created. We've run the checks have passed. We're ready to kind of enter them into the main section. So a reviewer can kind of go through this and look through kind of at what is happening. So I'm just going to open up an example review. So we have a pull request that gets generated. This is the file that happens. Underneath it, we get a report. This is for reviewers only, but might be useful just to have a look at. And it contains a number of different sections. First one's a bit of a checkbox of you've entered these things. So if someone wanted to kind of just see what they've looked at, they can record it. We then have a graph of anything that's linked. So if we have files that are referenced, so we don't have duplicates of everything, for instance, our region being global, we can have a link to it, which then has some extra information about what that means. So this is used for the background. So as a submitter, you don't need to worry about this, but you can see kind of where those different links are. Then we have, using those links, how similar are files. This is quite easy to check. If we're all pointing to the same actual controlled variables, then they will all be the same. And finally, we have kind of, this is where we need reviewers. We can check all the links that point externally, but things like free text, only a human can really review. And then so we have a grouping that kind of tells us these fields are quite similar to some others that exist, and the reviewer can make a decision of this already exists, this doesn't, and give you some feedback. With the feedback, a reviewer can kind of request change, accept, or comment. And so whenever they do that on the original issue, when that comes up, you will get a notification saying reviewer X has made these notes and enter this change here. So this is basically what would happen in the review process. So when we request changes, you'll get an update. The other part that would be quite useful is, I'll send the link to this as well, is we've recently made a submission tracker. So Rachel was on this call, so this is quite useful. So every time you submit something, you'll get a new box. It's split up into the different stages. So stage 1, as I mentioned, has your grid cells and then any model families that might be relevant. It tells you kind of the status that they're at. So here, for instance, we have everything's been merged, but we might have some places where changes have been made, something that's been approved but not yet made it in, and we might have those updates. So this takes a little while to update, but it might give you a clearer view of everything you've entered, especially if you have lots of entries. And then if you wanted to enter a new component in this, you can also click new. This won't work because I'm not logged in, but it will take you to the form that starts the next submission. So there are a couple of things that we can kind of look at, but in essence, all of this kind of gets documented in as in the web pages. The other thing that I will mention is for things like grids.
I'm just going to pause you, Daniel, because there's quite a lot of information that you've given us, and I wonder if it's worth asking if there's any questions at this moment before you talk about a new thing.
If you have a question, please just raise your hand or write it in chat and we can raise it for you. Doesn't look like we have any so far.
Okay. It was useful to me to see that list of the boxes to show the status of everything. Can you show us again, Daniel, where you see that?
So the easiest way, as with everything, if you go to the homepage of the Essential Model documentation, it's now on the little update and it's underneath submission tracker, or you can go for information for or you can just go to progress tracker on the left hand side menu, enter your GitHub handle,
and you just see your own submissions there,
and you see everything that you've made. In my case, most of these are testing submissions, but for someone else that would be what they've actually entered. So progress tracker on the left hand side menu.
Thank you.
Cool. The last thing I would mention is because we are submitting.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah. I can't see the chat, so someone's going to have to read it out to me.
Sorry. Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, if I would like to register to a model with different horizontal resolutions, should I register two models?
David?
Yeah, good question. Absolutely. So like a high resolution and a low resolution version of the same model that's otherwise got very similar or the same physical formulation. That's in CMIP two separate models. So they'll have two different source IDs, sort of my model L, my model H, or whatever they're called. So they would be registered as different models. However, the work is not double the work, because once you've registered all the physics descriptions for one model, you can just use those again for the second one. All you have to do is define the new low or high resolution grid and link it all together.
Okay, thank you very much.
And on that, for the main difference, if the grid's already registered and they already exist, then you have your model component. You just register that component with a different vertical and horizontal computational grid, and that means yes, it is a new source ID because it's got new components into it. But I imagine your naming would be very similar, and you just have a little bit appended to it, which is the way it seemed to be in CMIP-6. So in essence, if your grid's already registered, you just have to say, I have this component with this horizontal, this vertical, do that 3 or 4 times. And then you just do this step. So you can bypass a lot of these starting steps that take a while. In terms of duration, horizontal grid cells, which are kind of the lattice, the X and Y, that, depending on kind of what structure you're using, they are the bits that are taking the longest to review, just simply because we need to make sure we don't have kind of wraparound cells, we don't have numbers that don't make sense, and we want to check things out. Things like once we start getting to computational grids, but especially so on components, they're very easy to review, and they're also easier to edit. So if a description of the component is slightly off, that is fine. Our grids, however, when you submit it, it creates a slot and it names things going from 1, 2, 3 every time they get approved. So if we get a duplicate, different people point to what should be the same grid, but might have different slots, and that can cause problems later on. So we're really trying to prevent that. But the second half of this registration process should happen quite quickly. So in terms of delays, the very first step is the slowest, and then it gets easier, especially as things are already registered. So you just reuse them. Cool. And on that, I was just going to mention a second ago, we also have, if you did enter something that was identical, the Python script will automatically flag it up, and it will then bring up a little notice saying, it's a duplicate of this, just use this grid that already exists, for instance. So you won't have the risk of kind of creating. So if you do see a duplicate, it just says, use this number. You don't need to worry about someone approving it. It already exists. Someone's done the hard work for you. If it doesn't exist, you wait for someone to push the changes through. Once they've gone in, they've entered the EMD. You get pretty much the same table where it says, this is now your grid number and your issue number. I've made it recently that it also will have that in the title. And so you can find out what it is. And so from that kind of submission table, if I open, say, G115, you can kind of see in the title, you start getting that information back to you. So it makes it a little bit easier to remember what you've submitted, but that's kind of the whole purpose of this page that we'll reshare. I think that is me. So I was going to ask any other questions in regards to this process that we can kind of spend a bit more time on, or shall we continue?
So we've got a question in the chat, which is from Sandeep, asking about the Excel sheet that was shared earlier. So maybe David, do you want to explain why the Excel sheet was there and the sort of advice now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Excel sheet that we released around December, January time was really a sort of maybe a stopgap to help you or help people start to collect and put EMD information whilst we were still finalizing the system that we now have, that Dan has just been showing us. That's not the collection method, and it's not possible to fill in the spreadsheet and just sort of send it to CMIP. So if you did fill in information from in a spreadsheet, it's simply a sort of cut and paste, just copy it into the form system that we've seen today, and it will all go through the system and get process checked and all that. So it was I'm not sure how many people did use that at that time, but I know some people did. So if you did, it's great. You've got all your information to hand. It's just now a case of entering it into the new GitHub based system.
We've got any other questions just now before Dan continues? Rachel?
So the templates have a modify or a create, and sometimes I've been forgetting to switch it to create, but I'm also a bit confused about when would be a time when you would use modify compared to when you're just editing to fix a mistake.
So currently that is there for future use to distinguish. So the script, we need an indicator if the file exists. Do I try to create a new one, or do I just stop working there? Currently, that option doesn't do anything, so you don't need to worry about it. Whichever one it is, it will go through and it'll be updated. The idea was that if you wanted to modify in the future, you could potentially submit a form that only had 1 or 2 changes, and it made it easier to identify which fields had changes. And so it was just a way of telling kind of the script that followed on what to do. But as I mentioned, at this exact moment, that's not enabled, so you don't need to worry about it. And we were also discussing potentially maybe simplifying that process where you just say, this is the file that I've entered. These are the different kind of fields I want to change, and not specifying any other information and seeing if that works better or not. So we'll test both methods once we finish the submissions. For now, if there is an edit that needs to be done, we'll share an email, which will be emd@wcrp-cmip.org. You can send an email there, and then one of us can do that. Or alternatively, the discussions would do that, but we might be a little bit slower to respond to those. So I think currently, if there is a change that's needed, sending an email to us would be the best way, and we can just make the change. Otherwise, that field currently doesn't work. But the idea is later on, the grids we won't really be changing, because if you change it, you might then get a similarity and it might overlap with something else. But things like your model components or your descriptions or things like your source, you might want to add more papers as they get published. You might want to add slightly more useful information, either about the configuration or something. So something that isn't a breaking change, but basically enriches the documentation, or makes a slight correction that, again, doesn't have any dependencies on elsewhere, would be very valid corrections, and we are envisaging people making those. So this is not a process where it has to be perfect the first time around. It just needs the bare minimum bits of information to say, this is my model, this is what it does. These might be its weaknesses or its kind of pros, for instance, and that could then be enriched or edited or improved later. And so that's kind of the process we're working towards. But as I mentioned, at this point, we haven't quite got to having that ready. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think you're good to continue, Dan.
I have finished my section, so I believe David might tell us a little bit about kind of the review process and what happens around there, if I correct.
Yeah, I'll just show the what the issue chooser looks like that you couldn't see because you weren't had to the form chooser. Yep. So I'll just share my screen and okay. Hopefully you can see my screen. This is the submission guide that we'll all be familiar with. So if I now click on the choose a new form to create some content, we get a list of different types of form for different types of content. So we can have components and horizontal grids, vertical grids, grid cells, a form to link existing things we've already created together and so forth. Where we would typically start, because it's the thing that underpins nearly everything else, is maybe with a grid cell. You just click on the one you want, and this is the form that we saw a screenshot of in the documentation earlier. This is a real one, and we can see the various choices. We can choose the grid cell type. There's not much to it. We can choose various items for our description of our grid. I'm not going to worry too much about them. I've put in some bad numbers here which should show. And when we're happy, we just keep going down to the bottom of this form and we can click create. It's as simple as that. Then it creates this actual issue with all of our information typed in. So we've got our bad numbers and our various things. And this one, what's happening now is that this has been submitted to an automated checker, and it might not happen quick enough for the purposes of this demonstration. But because I put some bad numbers in, the western longitude has to be between 0 and 360, for example, and the latitude obviously between -90 and 90. The automated checker will pick those up and converse with you in this issue before it gets sent to review. So you'll get a notification, you've submitted a bad value, it needs to be in this range, please change it, and so forth. So that's just to show how that works. And there's a similar form for the model components. Instead of asking you for the resolution of this, there's a box to describe the physics and provide references. Each form is really very short. It only has maybe, I don't know, sort of 5 to 10 questions it asks, and many of them are pull down menu selections. Okay, so I'll just come back out to that. I'll show then what happens when you've submitted some content that's ready for review. So I've got one I prepared earlier. So this is a description of a model component that was has been created, submitted, reviewed, and accepted. So we can see what we can just have a quick look through what that process looks like. So this is the description of the component, and it's got a few other bits of information, and that's fine. So what happened, the automated checks on this submission were passed, which is great. And so the very next thing that happens automatically is a pull request is created. And this is the the creation of the actual files, the actual formatted files of the information that will get archived. So I will go to this pull request, and this is the thing. The pull request is the item that actually gets reviewed by a human. So this shows the same information that was nicely formatted in the issue, but as it would appear in the files in the archive. And again, there's information about whether or not it's the same as another one and so forth. And this got reviewed. Basically, a human, as soon as a pull request is created, it goes onto the list of things to review, which a pool of reviewers are monitoring. Charlotte looked at this one. It was absolutely fine. No changes needed to be done. So Charlotte gave it an approval. And then a second reviewer actually did the merge, so actually sort of ingesting the information into the archive. So as a second, just a sort of overview second sight check. So this was a very simple one. The content got shown to a reviewer. The reviewer looked at it, said, "Great, no problems with that," and the content was created. And then that's this, and given an ID and all that. I've got some examples on another tab here. So I scroll to the top. So this is an example of one in which there was a bit of interaction in the review. It wasn't perfect first time. So again, the same process happened. If I go back to the issue, so this was a submission from the submitter, the user, and it was all fine. The automatic checks were passed, so it created the pull request for review. This went to the list of things to review, and it got reviewed by somebody, Charlotte again. So Charlotte here made a couple of comments. So one of the the DOIs for one of the references didn't resolve, and there was a possibly surprising link to an article. So these are just questions that the reviewer thought might be worth flagging up. These queries were then resolved by the DOI being corrected and the removal of the surprising link, and so it was ready to go and was merged. So so the one end of the spectrum is what you submit is absolutely fine, just go straight through. This case there had to be an interaction. The reviewer asked a question which you'll get notified by because it's through your GitHub handle, and the question was resolved, answered, and then if it was fine, and it was merged. I have at the another end of the spectrum, sometimes there's quite a lot of to and fro and some more complicated questions get asked. So this is for a model family, the LIM model family. So in this pull request, there was quite some discussion about what it meant to be in this family and how that fitted in with various institutions. So there was some discussion, and there was some discussion about what collaborative institutions meant for this model family, and there was quite a lot of to and fro between the interested parties, i.e. the reviewer and the person submitting the information. And at the end of the day, everyone was happy, and it was the content was created and merged. So that's kind of what you can expect from the review process. Either what you've submitted goes straight through, or there may be some questions. Sometimes the questions are just this could well be fine. I just wanted to check that is really what you meant, kind of question. And sometimes it's there are things which the reviewer thinks should be expressed in a different way, or these two fields can't both be filled in at the same time type queries, that things which the automated checks can't do, basically. And we now have a pool of reviewers. I'll stop sharing my screen. We have a pool of reviewers and are, I think, working. The aim is we're working quite quickly through incoming requests. And the idea is that what you submit should get reviewed and merged within a small number of days, if potentially even on the same day. And it's quite important for you that this happens, because you need the ID, like the G123 code, in order to use that content to link in with other parts of your documentation. When you create a model component, you need to say which grid it's on. So you have the grid has to have been defined and given a code already. So we really are quite keen on getting your content through quickly, so it doesn't hold your process up. But do be aware that it can't all happen on the same day. Probably I've described everything. I want it all to happen now, because each separate part has to go through the review process. And if there are questions, there's obviously a delay whilst the questions get answered and so forth. Yeah, and saying if there is a mailing list which is being set up, for which if, for example, you think something's not been reviewed soon enough, which is certainly possible. Of course, we don't want it, or you've got a particular need you need to press on very quickly. Do talk to us on that. One thing we could potentially offer is to have a sort of arrangement. Okay, we'll all be online at this time, and any questions can get answered in real time, sort of thing, if there are any. And and yeah, so we do want to help you get this through quickly, and if there are any delays, we want to hear about them, particularly if they're from our end for not reviewing quickly enough. I just seeing a question in the chat. Is there any timeline for modelling centres to submit the EMD? There isn't a predefined absolute date by which it has to be done, but it has to be done before you submit any data to ESGF for the CMIP-7 archive. One of the checks that the ESGF publication process will do is, has the EMD for this model that you're submitting for been completed? If the answer is no, it will not publish your data. So if you're planning on publishing data very soon to ESGF, you'll need to also do the EMD very soon. If you're not going to publish your data until September or October, say, I'm making this up, that's sort of the deadline for you in that case to complete the EMD. So it's very much dependent on your own deadlines for submitting data to ESGF. I would just say about the grids are potentially slightly different, because the grid label, the G123 that you get from describing horizontal grid cells, that identifier is actually also included inside the archive netcdf files. It's one of the bits of global metadata that goes inside every file. So you may need to get your grids registered earlier if you're injecting that into your files, say as the model is simulating, as the model is running. So you might need that sometime before publication, more like at model runtime. It depends on what your setup is. If you're creating all of that CMIP-7 information sort of summarizing after the models have run, then maybe you don't have to worry about it now. You have to just think about your own workflow.
Rachel's got a question.
Yes, I had a question about that output grids. Do we need something for the vertical as well? I'm thinking about if something, so some variables need to be submitted on pressure levels. So do we need to have a vertical grid defined for those pressure levels?
Yeah, the answer is no. It's only the horizontal grids that we need this for the files. We could do lots of things. Obviously, the horizontal grid label is related to linking with cell area, cell measure files, and so forth. There isn't actually a pressing need to have every file giving its vertical grid a code. There's no sort of cross comparison purpose, so we haven't done that. It's just the horizontal grid, the G labels, that are needed for the actual output files. And it's a good point. I should just say the EMD is describing the model that was integrated, and we need to describe the computational grid that was used. It may be that the data you archive is on that computational grid, but it could also be on a completely different grid. Maybe you've regridded to a 1 degree grid or something. In that case, you need to describe the computational grid for the EMD, but using the same forms, you can describe the archive, the output grid you're using, say the 1 degree grid. That will also be given a new grid label, and that is the one you would use in your files if you are if you're doing that. So the output grid doesn't have to be the same as the one used internally in the model, but the internal model grid is the one that the EMD stores, because that's the one that obviously sort of has a bearing on the the physical formulation of the model.
Do we have any other questions at this point? So yeah, Sandeep's just asking the same question about the high and low resolution. So I think, David, you said that yes, you need to register both of them. They are two different model registry.
Yeah. So I imagine the typical usage would be, say, you describe your low resolution model in its entirety, say, and then you say, great, now I'll do the high resolution model. And all you have to do is define the high resolution grid and then just link in the same components. So it's the same atmosphere, the same land surface, just link those in with the new high resolution grid. And that's all bundled together as a new sort of with a new source ID. So there should be no duplication of effort. You don't have to re-describe the atmosphere for the high and low resolution versions of the model, because the physics of those atmosphere components is actually the same in both. It's just the grid they're running on is different. I hope that's clear. And again, this was the same pattern in principle. We didn't have the EMD for previous versions of CMIP, but different resolution models have always had different source IDs in the CMIP projects. So that should be quite familiar.
We've got another question in chat. Should the affiliation be registered first? I noticed that many affiliations are already available for selection when registering models.
Dan, do you want to answer that?
You're on mute, Dan.
Okay, for registering grids, there is no affiliation field, so you don't need to worry about those. But later on, especially in your source, you will need one, so it is useful adding it. I'm working on kind of fixing that because that's in a different location. But you can fill out the registration form, which we can share in a little bit. It should be somewhere in the documentation. So you can fill out the form. I'm working on getting that to work now. And then once I fix that, which I've been working on it yesterday and I'm doing so today as well, they should start appearing after about a day. So urgently, no, but if you have spotted that it's missing, if you did put up an issue, then at some point it will automatically make its way through, hopefully before you need it. If at this stage you really need to fill out that section, your affiliation isn't there, and you know your acronym for your affiliation, which shouldn't clash and follows the rules that are outlined in creating a new one, you can fill out the form using another affiliation and then use the edit links to change that to what it would be. And so once we get to reviewing, we'll make sure that that exists and that link works. So at this moment, your submission will go through for review for the EMD. It just won't be merged in until that affiliation physically exists in the other repository, but you can still fill out the form, just select a different one and then correct it. If you're not yet at that stage, then yes, just register it. And then by the time you get to the stage, hopefully that will all have been sorted. So we're a little bit behind on that one, but that should hopefully be sorted in the next day or two. Does that answer your question?
Okay, have we got any other questions just now? Rachel?
So Dan, when you pulled up my progress tracker, I think under one of the stages I've got a thing that's, well, it's actually kind of, it was probably me experimenting or getting impatient or whatever, so it's actually not required. Is there a way to remove something that's not needed?
One of the admins can sit there and remove a pull request and issue. So we can do that, or you can ignore it. It very much depends on how you feel, because if that has already been closed, it's not affecting anything. So that progress tracker is more for yourself rather than anyone else. So that file, if it's not been merged, then it doesn't exist, and so it won't get in the way of anyone. So it's entirely on. If it does help you, just having a cleaner plate, you can always just request one of us and we'll manually click through and delete it. If not, you can just kind of ignore it and it won't cause any problems anywhere else. So a good example would be if you filled out something, then you went, oh no, I need to change it. And you filled out effectively the same thing. It has the same title, but rather than editing the form, you went, I have so many changes, it'd be quicker for me to fill out again. You might get duplicates, and then yeah, the choice is we can sit there and delete them. But if it's not bothering you, then it's not causing any problems. If that helps.
Yeah. Okay. And I think my one remaining issue now is the CIS and how we're going to deal with something that's a single layer. Has any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I tagged David in discussion, but if he only came back yesterday, I don't know if you've got to see it. My suggestion was if we only have one layer for a vertical grid, to register a single layer vertical grid, and then everything's got a link. But I don't know, David, have you got any comments if there's a better solution, or should we potentially leave it blank? Or
yes,
should we?
You can either, yeah. If there is, no vertical grid, it can be just omitted. It does the CIS, is there, is it a defined thickness, but there's only one layer, or is it notional?
I mean, I think it can have different, it can grow to a different thickness, but certainly in terms of its output, it only has that long. It doesn't have a vertical dimension.
You should say a lot of the EMD is you can make of it what you will. There were going to be, we always knew there would be cases where it's, there's different ways to describe the same thing depending on what you want, what you find important. And this is a good example. You could either say, oh, we're happy just not not providing a vertical grid for this, or you could provide a vertical grid with a. I think it's okay to have a description that says, this is a single layer model, free text that and that layer varies, in thickness in time or something, if you found that useful. So this is a good example of a sort of a bit of nuance where whatever works for you is fine, but it's perfectly acceptable to omit the vertical grid if you feel there basically isn't one.
So at the moment I'd left it as not specified, but then the component is registered but without the horizontal one linked to it. So
in that case, sorry, I was going to say, in that case, I can create a vertical grid saying no vertical grid, and then you've explicitly stated that rather than accidentally forgotten it, and that will clear that up. So we can sort that out. But yeah, I think that's a good solution.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, okay. That sounds like a good improvement we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should just stress when we review, say following off that previous point, we're not making any judgment on what you've written. It's your content, and you know what you want to write. We're just looking for simple things, maybe spelling mistakes or things which appear inconsistent that maybe you didn't intend. We're not trying to change anything that you've provided. We don't know the content. The reviewers don't know the details of your model. Only you know that. So there's no question of trying to sort of tell you you're wrong, if you see what I mean, in that sense. It's just to try and mold what you have provided into the confines, the structure of the EMD. That's all we're trying to do. Yeah.
Okay, is there a bit more demo to go through, Charlotte? Do you have anything that you're running through?
Well, David has already covered the model description stuff, which is what I've mostly been reviewing. And I would say that you do need to have content in the description field for your model entries. There's been some content that's been sent where there is just only a reference that was for a previous version of the model with no description, and that sort of thing is not enough information, because if the references are describing a previous version of the model, then we don't have any content from you to describe what you currently have. But you might have some references that are relevant, but we'd need some information that you provide to us. I would finally add that the top level kind of overview information about your model, it's really useful content to have, because it's that might find its way into downstream services such as the Copernicus Climate Change Services Climate Data Store, or other climate service providers would use this documentation to provide users with something about your model. So if, as you're providing your information, you have that in mind, that top level information is the information that's most likely to be seen by the public, then yeah, bear that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to as an example of that, I saw one example recently where the description was basically this is an atmosphere model, sort of full stop. It was almost that, which is sort of a true description of the atmosphere component, but if that was what was printed out in the downstream services, that wouldn't really be very useful. So you might want to think always think about providing, you know, a few more sentences of useful information at the very least. Yeah.
Rachel, is that an old hand or another question?
Sorry, that was an old hand. But yes, I guess as one of the earlier people trying this, it's taken me a long while to get through, and the end is now in sight, but I want to thank everyone for helping me along the way.
Yeah. And we'd like to help you and the other people who've engaged with this earlier, because it's helped us get the system to where it is, which I think it's much improved from where it was like a month ago. So thanks.
Okay, we're at time now, but we'll send the recording and the key links to you all, so you have that information. And of course, you can always contact via the email or raise an issue. So please do, if you have any problems, do raise an issue or send an email so we know how we can help you out. Thank you very much for joining today, and hope you have a good rest of day or evening. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.